you're bands that are drawing the same conclusions as the Ramones. You're just doing what like the Ramones did, where this is actually a take off of the Ramones. This is actually those Ramones core bands weren't really copying the Ramones per se. They were doing the same things that the Ramones were doing. This is actually taking from the Ramones, and in my opinion, where it kind of sits is more in. So like the Ramones, it's funny. They're so influential in hardcore. They're influential in pop punk. They're influential in indie music and in
Yes.
garage rock. So that's
Agreed.
what this really sort of lends itself into, and probably objectively what it fits into would be like a garage rock band that leans heavily into its punk side.
What's up, everybody? How you doing? Welcome back to the Punk Rock Review Podcast. Tonight, me and Rob are hanging out. Per usual, every week we do this. And tonight we're talking about two iconic records for different reasons. They both happen to be released within a few weeks of each other and be the band's third album. Isn't that weird? It's just a weird coincidence. But we're talking about Blink-182, Enema of the State, and the Donnas Get Skintight. I think that this will be a very interesting conversation. I think I'm going to learn some stuff tonight based on what Rob told me last week. But before we get started, I do want to throw a couple things out there, like news notes and what do you call it? Like at like the church, they have the what do they call it? Like news and notes, but it's called something.
Yeah, the announcement. I know what you mean.
Announcements, basically. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So okay, so I just did a podcast. I literally, like, before I got on here with you, when I texted you, I was still doing a podcast with somebody. I had that one that I do with my buddies on movies and stuff. We do like once a week. We took a pretty long break because my buddy was buying a house and moving, and you know how that is. That's you know. Anyways, it was my week to pick the movie, and I picked SLC Punk. So that episode is going to drop on the Punk Rock Review, and I would like people that are interested in movies to know that that's coming, and to go check out Cinema Studies if you get the chance to. He does really good work over there. It's not as often as I drop. Of course, I do a lot of content, but his work is quality. Very, 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 very good.
My final paper for my bachelor's degree was an analysis of SLC Punk.
That's amazing.
I have a lot of familiarity with that script, and that I've watched it way too many times than anyone who really should. And I've written tons of words about it that no one's ever read other than my professor.
That's awesome. I love that movie. Spoiler alert, I rank it pretty high amongst some of my favorite movies. But okay, so before we start talking about these albums, two upcoming podcast guests I want to just mention. One is Robo, formerly of Death by Stereo, coming on very soon. We've got Brad Logan coming back pretty soon. I just did one with Richard of Bullshit Detector. So I got like guests coming back, which I think is a very big positive. And then on Thursday, if you're familiar with my channel and you've been keeping up with what's going on, I'm going to have Grammy award-winning writer, producer, and all-around music guru, Dante Ross, is going to be on the show. And it'll be fun because the reason he's coming on the show is because he was incredibly rude to me publicly and said some really nasty things. And I stood up for myself. So we will see how that goes. That one could be, I'm hoping that it's just a conversation between two adults that I get to learn a bunch of stuff. But, you know, I don't know him, so I don't know. But
yeah,
he basically said that I was a poser and that I was uninformed and a terrible punk rocker. And then I was like, what? Whatever, man. Do you, buddy? And then I said,
I know we all know that. What does that have to do? Why do you have to say that?
Like what? Yeah, I mean, what are we doing here? And so I said, yeah, you got me, buddy. And then I said, he said something else, and I was like, bro, you're being a moron, man. You're being a prick. And then I said, instead of saying that I was uninformed and didn't know nothing, he's mad because I don't like Bad Brains in the Clash. And and I said, instead of saying all that to me, you could have said, hey, I'm this guy with this background, and if you'd like to talk, I could tell you why this stuff's important to me and why I think you should know something about it. So I also privately messaged him and said, hey, why don't you come on the podcast, dude? and I think it shocked him a little bit. So we got it figured out. He's going to come on Thursday night and talk. I'm actually pretty excited to talk to him. It was a tongue-in-cheek intro, but like I'm excited to talk to the guy. I mean, he's won a Grammy. He's produced for he's a hip hop guy though. So hip hop and punk rock are related. They're like cousins, man. And I'm not a big hip hop guy, but I'm a Houston hip hop guy. So I'm excited to talk to this dude. I don't think we're going to agree on a lot, to be honest, but I'm not really there to agree with him. I'm there to like listen to what he's got to say. So hopefully he comes ready to learn me a little bit. So we'll see. But yeah, he was interesting to talk to.
That's funny how that ends up. He comes on your show,
bro. I'm not, dude. I don't back down from anybody. I don't care who you are. And just because he's got a history with, so he apparently he like knows HR and Bad Brains and the Beastie Boys guys like personally. So he's got some background in it, but he's a hip hop guy, man. And like, you know, some of these old head guys, he's like 15 years older than me. So some of these dudes that age, they're really, really adamant about you have to like and respect and acknowledge all this stuff or else you can't be something. And I just don't agree with that. So, but it'll be interesting, man. I've got a lot of stuff going on right now. Oh, so officially tonight, I will be finishing part 2 of the Street Punk video series.
All right.
It is almost done, man. I am so excited. A little nervous, to be honest, but I'm very excited. Oh. All right, bro. Let's talk about some punk rock music. Which album you want to cover first, my friend?
Let's start with the Donnas, then we'll close with Blink.
Let's do it. So, okay. I got a couple of things I want to say. I want to let you take over after that because I think you have a lot of information. So June 8th of 1999, that's a couple of weeks from now, it'll be hitting its 25th anniversary for the Donnas Get Skintight. It is 14 songs, 38 minutes. Dude, I'm telling you, this is a rip-roaring good time. I didn't go like necessarily like song per song like I usually do because I was just listening to it and enjoying it, honestly. I just kind of forgot to write stuff down, but I did write a couple of things. I put down that the guitar playing on this record is surprising for young people in general, but for it to be from some young ladies, I think is even more shocking because, well, I don't know a lot of women that play guitar personally, and it's just gonna sound weird, but I have this like idea that women's hands are a little smaller than men's, just on average, and playing guitar with smaller hands is tough. So I don't know. I don't mean that to sound like a backhanded compliment. It's a very direct compliment. Like the guitar playing on this record is fantastic. You can hear a lot of influences from Ramones all the way to Kiss on this record, and the lyrical content I think is super, super fun. It's very, very raunchy, teen comedy style, very sexual, very, very dirty. I like it. The Donnas are a great band in that respect. So my opinion of the band in this record is that it's very, very good. It's real easy to get through. It's a very quick listen. That being said, I want to hear what you have to say because I think you're about to talk about some stuff I don't know anything about.
So a few things based on what you said. You talk about them, being young women, and that the term "young" is definitely applicable. They were. So when they wrote most of this record, either while in high school or right after being in high school, and again, it's their third record. So
that's crazy.
They are literally like 3 kids that got together in middle school to play like Battle of the Bands, and then ended up as this major label band. So they are actually that now.
Wait, did that actually? Sorry, is that how they became a band?
Well, no, I'm saying like they've been
okay.
I was middle school.
Now they you're being literal.
They did lose a Battle of the Bands like back in that time. It is like an origin story that they have hung on to because they were a lot better than the bands they were going for. But
that's awesome.
So yeah, they are super young. You talk about the style. It's very much, it's not Ramones core, because Ramones core is really your bands that are drawing the same conclusions as the Ramones. You're just doing what like the Ramones did, where this is actually a take off of the Ramones. This is actually. Those Ramones core bands weren't really copying the Ramones per se. They were doing the same things that the Ramones were doing. This is actually taking from the Ramones, and in my opinion, where it kind of sits is more in. So like the Ramones, it's funny, they're so influential in hardcore. They're influential in pop punk. They're influential in indie music and in garage rock. So that's
Agreed.
What this really sort of lends itself into, and probably objectively what it fits into would be like a garage rock band that leans heavily into its punk side. Now, the punk thing is really interesting with them because of all the bands we've talked about. Are they punk? Are they not punk? The one band that would tell you that they were absolutely not punk would be the Donnas. In fact, if the Donnas were anything, they were metalheads. coming up. You talk about like that.
That's very clear.
The school band they had coming up, like they were in the early 90s. They were Metallica heads. They were into a lot of heavy metal, and they were into
Thrash.
the 80s power metal. They were into both of those. So they had a band, I
Yeah.
think it was called the Electrocutes was the name of the band they were in before. So
Nice.
the
I
Donnas,
like it.
here's the thing. The Donnas are a gimmick band, so to speak. They're
Oh yeah.
not necessarily a joke band, but it's the same way that like Gwar is a gimmick band. The same way that
Yeah.
all these bands. Now punk, we're used to the more natural, like one-on-one kind of thing. Whereas the Donnas really their gimmick for this album and this part of their career was they wanted to be a garage rock Ramones style, like basically a girls Ramones was kind of their idea. The bubblegum punk from the 70s. They wanted to bring that. They connected with someone, and it was really weird because always with these female bands, people accuse them of being like puppets of someone else and stuff, and they kind of were not industry plants, not industry plants in that way. They collaborated with this one dude, and it was his idea to do like this Ramon style thing with this like thrash 80s band that were coming up, and he sort of came up with that aesthetic for them. And they fit into that. So they're from San Francisco. They're from around the Bay Area. They played at Gilman and were on Lookout, but they're not really they were never part of like that Lookout scene or that Gilman Street scene. They were immediately outsiders within that scene. Again, they came up in a more, they liked punk rock well enough, but they liked a whole lot of stuff. They came up, again, not in that scene, younger than even the youngest people in that scene, which was already a young scene. So they never really fit the Lookout mold. They never really fit the Gilman mold in that way. And here's the other thing about them. Like this album, they are one of those bands that, okay, you said the few albums. So they had been around for a little while. So they paid their dues more than what people probably acknowledge because they were so chronologically young. They're like, what do you mean these 18-year-olds have played their dues? Yeah, they've been together since they were 13. Like they literally have played their dues. But once like this album started to kick off and right before that, they became like a phenomenon. Like a phenomenon that was kind of a little too big for Lookout. So as they're this small time like garage band, you have Lemmy going to some of their shows and shouting them out, and you have people were really fascinated with them. So they actually developed this thing
I didn't know that.
Where they had a lot of older fans at their shows. When you think about what Lookout bands generally have, like young kids at their shows, and they're coming with like these old men that are like and part of it is like it's a little like
it's not creepy at all.
It's very creepy.
Yeah.
It is extremely creepy. It's also, on top of it being creepy, the music they played appealed to the demographic that they were attracting. You're playing 70s rock. That's not necessarily appealing to kids in the late 90s. It's appealing to the people that were coming. So they were sort of immediately not outcast in the way that Green Day was from the underground scene, but they were just too big for the underground scene almost from jump. Like they had to reschedule tours to make them bigger, like at this time period. And I say all that as a piece of connective tissue to what I teased last night is, did they kill Lookout Records? Like if you were to ask Larry Livermore, he would probably say that they did. What that means. So a lot of bands that were on Lookout.
Hold on real quick before we dive into that, because I feel like this is going to be a long conversation.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, I will forget these things. One, I was surprised to hear you say that you didn't consider them a Ramones core band, because I absolutely do, but I think that's kind of subjective. We can kind of have both arguments on both sides of that. Dude, the more I hear about this like Gilman scene and this like Bay Area scene, dude, it just seems so toxic and gross, dude. Everybody wasn't cool enough and couldn't be there. They didn't like them because they were too poppy and they were too young and they were girls. Man, I look at this scene as such a important part of the stuff that I love, but I don't know that I would have loved it if I was there. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think like if you're in the early run of it, it's this really special thing. Like if you were in the run that like Op Ivy was in, that Tim Armstrong were in, and then after that, it kind of became this extremely gatekept thing.
Yeah,
that I think was too much. Like, and I get it. Some of it comes from that Maximum Rock and Roll side of it, which was more militant than the Gilman side than even that. But
yeah.
And it just was because, you have Lookout, you have the Donnas. They are the second band to ever sign from Lookout. So they're basically the first band since Green Day. That whole run that the label has, no other band ever signed directly to a major
Except the
since Green
Donnas
Day.
and Green Day.
Yeah, now like Screeching
Huh.
Weeds on some of those bands, they might have made like a run here or there, but they were bouncing around a couple of places. This was the second band that came out of there. And I wouldn't say like the Gilman Street though was very specifically hostile to them. It was like kind of all of like punk rock was kind of hostile to them.
Okay, okay. I'm glad
in a way
that you said it that way. God,
yeah, because
made
even
that clear.
like even they were like outcasts even within the Warped Tour crowd backstage at the Warped Tour, because they were like, you got to think about it, they're a main stage headliner act. Those bands that are on that part, unless it's like a band that really just broke and is a phenom, are generally bands that have been together for like a decade or so by the time you get to the main stage of Warped Tour.
Yeah, that's true.
And at that time, like they're like men our age, you know what I mean, that are doing that thing. Here come these teenage girls that don't really want to be accused of fraternizing just with all the dudes all the time, so they stay on their bus and their van most of the time at the Warped Tour, and then they get this reputation as being snobby and snooty.
Yeah, I can see how that would happen.
They really just didn't fit in with any, and they weren't. And they weren't the type of people that couldn't fit in. You know what I mean? They weren't like too good for the.
Oh no, they were like
that.
Pretty girls. Like
they were just like, so you talked about the thing with the hands and playing guitar that made me think of something. So they were always really really tight as a band, live and on television.
Very good band,
and all this, and that was intentional, and it was because they were women, as they said. They knew if I mess up one note, if I miss something, it's gonna be, because so their whole thing wasn't that it was less of a sexism between like, you're not part of this club, and more of a sexism of you're not good enough to do this, and that really just pissed them off to no extent. So they tightened up their chops to this really precise point, and that's why like when I was younger, I never thought of them in really any relation to our stuff. It was only years later that I realized they were on lookout, that I realized, okay, they're kind of from where all this other stuff I like, because I always looked at them, again, you talk about that tightness. They were like a regular band for regular people that just had trimmings of stuff that was similar to what I like. Like, I didn't know necessarily they were a gimmick band necessarily back then, but you could kind of tell. It was a little more obvious, and people didn't necessarily get it because there was less of it back then. Nowadays there's a lot of bands that like, we're doing this styling, or we're doing that, or they're doing that. So like for me, they were a band that I was really, really aware of because they were always in magazines. They were always on covers of them. There was articles. I tended to read articles, like about them and
I missed
Stone,
that
Alternative
stuff.
Press, Spin. They were very, very covered. They also, once they signed after this album, even during this album, they perform in Detroit Rock City, the Kiss biopic. They're a band.
Love that movie.
In that movie,
love that movie.
I love that movie too, and that's really where their inspiration is really of these sort of like eras again of the 70s. They fit right into like that kind of culture, and they're doing that on this is 99 when they do that. That's on this album cycle.
Yeah. Well, what I was gonna say, and I'm so sorry, I'm not trying to cut you off.
Yeah, no. I'm being long-winded today.
They have this sound, like you said. The more I'm thinking about it, the more I think I'm agreeing that they don't have like they're punk adjacent more so than punk. And there's bands like this, like the Jolts. You can look at this cover and tell these dudes probably have a similar sound to the Donnas and Turbo Negro and what was the other band? There's like these big, they're like rock and roll bands, but they have like a punk DIY like ethos. Like they go out and they do things themselves. They very much can tour with punk bands, but they're not quite as Mohawk and Spike Jacket. They're more like glammed out kind of. It's more like the proto punk like look, but with the sound of like classic rock, Dazed and Confused. Because they had like, these girls had like almost like high waisted jeans, like tight t-shirts, feathered hair. They looked like they were from the early 80s. Like,
yeah, no, they were trying to kind of affect that. Like they were trying to pretend to almost be like the Runaways or those kind of bands. You know what I mean? They were sort of
Runaways, dude. Yeah.
They were sort of imitating that. And it's a funny. I don't think people really can take issue with that because it's not like they're portraying themselves to be something of this great authenticity and they're not doing like it's pretty obvious, especially now we look at it, that they're winking at you as they are doing it. Like they said, like even our song lyrics were not true. Obviously, we weren't as promiscuous. It was more of like a fantasy, the same way that a lot of men bands, it's the same exact thing.
I think it's refreshing to have blown away by that.
Yeah. And they said they were doing what Lemmy does and his, you know what I mean? They were really just sort of giving voice to that from kind of like a female perspective, which is what, like you said, these songs sound raunchy, and they sound even raunchier because they're coming from a female. Let's be honest, like the subject matter,
for sure,
it stands out to you because of that. So the oddest duck, so to speak, that you ever would have. I would also say after this album and even going into it, they were really, again, because punk was just kind of one of their interests. They really weren't interested in punk when this left. They wanted to really go further into the metal stuff, and then eventually they had like a softer album. You know, they have they got the Motley Crue cover on this, and they have another song. What song was it? Let me look at the. Is it Searching the Streets? Again,
Okay.
just a straight up like 80s metal. And here's the thing. When people think of like 80s hair metal, they think of like Poison and they think of like late 80s Motley Crue and like the Dr. Feelgood era and all that. They don't really realize what early hair metal sound like, which is actually a lot similar to this, which early hair metal was kind of a combination of the new wave stuff. So some of the runoff of punk with some of the other pieces of rock and roll class. It was basically the same formula that used this. Is if you listen to like the first Motley Crue record, Too Fast for Love or Shout at the Devil, that
hair
stuff
metal was good.
Yeah, it's basically it's Cheap Trick plus a little heavy trimmings is kind of what
Absolutely.
it is.
Absolutely.
And I think this has a lot of those same kind of trimmings or same kind of conclusions. So this is not like a glam metal album. They would do some glam metal stuff later on, but you could see all those same tentacles. To me, it's just sort of an homage to like rock history almost is what their band sort of feels like.
Well, yes, I agree with that. I put on here a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. There's a song called You Don't Want to Call. It's the first song on the album that like slows the pace down a little bit, but it caught my attention like immediately, bro. It's like a Ramones-esque, but it's a ballad. It's really catchy. And excuse me. I wrote down that this album, and it fits the conversation really well, which is why I wanted to interject for a second. The album reminds me of Dazed and Confused and Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It's really cool to hear music like this, especially with the lyrics, and they're talking about all this like young love and raunchy stuff from a female perspective. I'm glad that we're on the same page with that because I think that it's important, and it's so rare that it stands out even though it's very similar to stuff we already like. You know what I'm saying? And then the last thing I'll say before I let you get back to what you're saying is that I appreciate the addition of the cowbell all throughout this record.
That's what makes it a rock record and not a punk record to me is that like it automatically turns into Blue Oyster Cult once it has the cowbell hitting.
This one has so much in common with some of the lighter Swingin' Utters music.
Yeah, which again would pull from similar pools that the Donnas were kind of pulling from on this. Now, real quick, just on the Lookout thing. So Larry Livermore, he exits in 97 from Look. He's the founder of Lookout, the guy who brings in Trey Cool, all of this stuff. Generally considered ally, Green Day, all this stuff. Yeah. Now he leaves Lookout in 90. No, he's such a cool, like hippie old guy punk rocker. He literally just like rolls out of his crappy office one day and just be like, okay, I've done that. I don't want to do it anymore. I'm going to go live on my own.
That's amazing, bro.
Like, isn't that? And the guy apparently never really made that much money, even from running Lookout. Like, so he was always a bad businessman the whole time, but he had an eye for talent. He was he obviously was a very, very good to find his little neighbor was going to be the drummer in Green Day. Like he was able to pick that out. He was a very good talent guy. Bad at business. Like Brett Gerwitz, great at business, great talent scout, all thing. Larry was bad at business, but he didn't actually run his business like a business, so it never went out of business, so to speak. You know what I mean? So it's sort of sustained on its own weirdness. Now he exits in 97, leaves it to Chris Applegren, who's his successor, who's like kind of the villain sometimes in the Lookout story because he's the guy that takes over and then it falls out. Well, of all the bands coming in, there was a lot of bands that Larry and him didn't agree on. Coming in, the Donnas was one of them. Larry didn't think the Donnas fit Lookout. Chris did. Chris's wife, Marie, who I think actually works with the label and was in another band that had seen the Donnas, actually ends up managing the Donnas. So now Larry, I think very correctly identified they didn't fit the Lookout band, so the Lookout crowd is not just going to automatically be super loyal to them. And he was pretty right about that. Now there was about 5 bands. None of those other bands made it. So that's why you don't know who any of those bands are, but you know who the Donnas are because they got so big. Now, the thing is with the Donnas is at that time, Lookout just starts doing not as well because pop punk didn't do as well for a little bit in the late 90s before like what we're going to talk about later on really resets everything. Everything quits falling off, and the business practices aren't as good. They have a more expensive distributor, all this stuff. Lookout needs cash in the late 90s. So I think also, to be fair to the guys running Lookout, like I said, even on the underground, the Donnas are such a phenomenon. They kind of had to chase that dragon. Like, it was something that was in their backyard that they kind of they needed to as a business. Now, ultimately, the criticism from a lot of the other bands on Lookout is, as the cash is going down, they're not being promoted. The Donnas are on soundtracks. The Donnas are on so the allegation from the other bands was that, like, the money wasn't going to them and the money was going to the Donnas. Now, the guys in Lookout will say, no, there was just no money coming in. Like the Donnas were the Donnas were pretty self-sustaining on what they were doing. And but the Donnas sort of helped with the sort of professionalization of Lookout that kind of ultimately killed them. So the Donnas also become
so crazy.
One of the big villains in killing Lookout. It was Green Day and Op Ivy that killed Lookout, like, officially, because once they pulled their back catalogs, then there was no money to be made, which the money that they weren't paying out. But so in the Livermore era, though, payments had always come, like, the train still kind of ran on time in the Livermore era. Right when the Donnas come in and right when Apple Grid takes over is when those things fall down. So I don't think the Donnas have never been accused of doing anything necessarily negative to bring that downfall. But I do think it's not their presence wasn't a non-factor in bringing the label down. But it's not the only factor. But that is why, because suddenly you had all this attention. You had this band that's getting, attention, getting not only attention from majors, but getting major type attention where you're on soundtracks, you're in movies, you're doing all this stuff.
That creates a huge rift amongst, like, lifelong punkers. Just,
Ben Weasel's going crazy over this, like, when he's hearing about this, you know what I mean?
Jealousy is a real disgusting thing. And I'm not like, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like, I'm not immune to jealousy.
Yeah.
But I really try to keep that stuff at bay, because that feeling, those emotions will make you do really crazy, disgusting stuff. And I can only imagine the amount of grief that they were getting dealt during these times, is my point.
Yeah. And to kind of just put a bow on that, like, they've talked about in later years, like, they had the Donnas turn 21, which was on the major after this, and they actually gave vinyls to Lookout, like, throughout their careers. I don't know if they struck that kind of deal with them. I mean, again, vinyls in the early 2000s though didn't quite sell at the same rate that they would have.
That's true.
Later on, but they, like, that vinyl did come out on Lookout, and then they had their record that turned 20. Yeah, that turned 21. Up All Night turned 21 or whatever, and then the one
Spend the Night was awesome.
Spend the Night, yeah. The one they had after that. They wanted to drop the Donna persona, because they had, like, a Ramones type of thing. They were all like Donna something, like, they dropped that, and they had just, like, slightly more serious music, and for whatever reason it just kind of bombed out of the gate. I know there was a production,
because it's not what people wanted from them.
Yeah, and there was a production issue on it too. So it was one of those first dual discs where they would have, like, a DVD on one side and a CD on the other, and so there was, like, a production plant error that cut off part of the album, which messed up the day one orders, which is back then was huge for radio play.
That's crazy.
So, like, this confluence of things, and then, like, they were just, we tend to find these bands that don't last very long in the majors usually had almost a full career before they got there. And I think the Donnas were kind of one of those bands. Like, they were, even though people might have viewed them as this overnight success, they really, really weren't. So they talk about it like they wish they kind of just would have enjoyed it more in the moment, because they had all these fans, they were being very successful, but just the climate they were in and the way that they were so defensive and had to be so on their, like, they said they hated going, like, interviewers would just ask them if they all got their period at the same time. And it was just like, it was, I
can't imagine that.
It was, they said it was just terrible. Like, they endorsed everything. So, because they didn't really have the punk ethos. So, like, they didn't care, like, what was selling out to them. Like, they got offered to do the Budweiser commercial. They were like, hell yeah, we're going to do the Budweiser commercial. The only thing they wouldn't do was female only advertising, because they thought that would typecast them a little much as just, like, the girl band who does that. Like, they wanted to
probably a wise move.
They wanted to be, like, a major, like, player. So they were in, like, the Target commercial or whatever. And they were really, you talked about the thing. They were in so many soundtracks back in the day. They were always in soundtracks.
That's pretty awesome,
and commercials, and that's where their music kind of fits to me. Like, even this album just sounds like if you were making a soundtrack for, like, a punk rock movie, the band in the movie would probably be the Donnas, and it would just kind of sound like this. Like, it's very in your face, it's very explicit, and it's also accessible at the same time.
It's got a lot of similarities to Kiss. I kept hearing Kiss over and over and over and over in this record, dude. Like
Yeah, I think they pull a lot.
I'm
from
not even
that.
complaining. I'm just making an observation.
No, they pull a lot from that era. Obviously, they pull a lot. Like Kiss is. Funny thing about Kiss, I always say like they look cooler than they actually sound. Like if they
1,000,000%.
if they actually sounded like they look, they'd be the greatest band ever. That doesn't mean they're a bad sounding band. Like their
I like
sound
Kiss,
though
they're all right.
is generic 70s rock. Like that's actually what they.
Yeah,
that is what they are. So this pulls a ton from that. It's also like the guitar competency on this thing, like, and you mentioned that earlier,
bro,
is just
so good.
That's what really takes it above and gives it that sort of garage rock flavor to it. Is whenever you're done with your big, your chugging kind of thing, and then you go into solos, sometimes during, like, there are lead parts, I should say, not solos, during the chorus that are just playing and giving that high pitch, that rip roar, that like kind of that 50s 60s really just rock guitar sound.
Dude, it's so good.
Yeah, and so it's really obvious that they came up on all this different stuff and could probably play just about anything, because there's stories of them like no one liked one of their early shows, so they just played a bunch of Guns N' Roses covers, and everyone liked the Guns N' Roses songs. So
that's awesome. Dude, Guns N' Roses is so good, bro. Or they were. Oh man,
very, very, very difficult thing probably for teenage girls to play. I still wonder too, like, had they come around into a different scene or into a different time, like what their career really would have been, because it was weird once they got to the top two, they come from literally like the stew that Green Day and these guys come from, but they're not really of that group. And then they get placed in pop music next to like Christina Aguilera and this kind of other stuff, but they're such like a rock band compared to those acts. You know what I mean?
A strange comparison to be dropped in there with Christina Aguilera.
But that was what they would, if you look at the top female artists of like 2002, 2003.
So crazy, bro.
Like Britney, Christina, and the Donnas, and Avril are kind of in the mix. You know what I mean? But compared to all of those, that's the one thing. Yes, they may have been a gimmick. They were a band, though. They were absolutely a band. Like when they were meeting with the majors,
they were amazing musicians, dude.
One of the suggestions was for them to drop their instruments. That was one of the suggestions when they were having the meetings with the majors, and that guy quickly they did not go with that. Yeah, but they thought, okay, yeah, like we'll just make you into like these singing pop stars, basically into like a girl group.
Shit can immediately.
Yeah, but yeah, basically into like I think he's the guy that hired Christina Aguilera. They make a joke about that. That's why I mentioned.
Good grief, dude, that's wild.
Yeah, like think about it, because then the thing about that is like, okay, the Donnas didn't last long because they chose to. They actually ran a label for a while. That was kind of their weird way of getting back is they went into the underground and ran a label.
That's pretty dope.
Where the hell I was going with that whole point, but yeah, you see the let's say the disposableness. Like, how do they have wanted to go on? Assuming, like, think of the indie craze that happened in like the late 2000s and stuff like that, they would have probably fit right
with like the Strokes and stuff. Oh, dude, they absolutely
and the post-punk stuff. They would have fit into all that if they were just four pretty girls that were singing. Well, guess what? They're 21 this year. They'll be 26 in 5 years, and people won't be interested.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But if they're shredding their instruments, they do that until they decide they don't want to do that anymore. So
that's crazy that they were told that maybe they should drop the instruments. Like I sincerely don't understand. Like what's the benefit that brings to the table? Like, what do you accomplish by getting them to drop the instruments? Because it's so obviously counterproductive, like detrimental to their like. I don't know, man. That blows my mind that you said that. Like,
exactly. Yeah, the reason why those old men were finding them attractive and all that is because they were playing. They were a rock band. Like that is.
Can you imagine like a drummer being like, "Dude, check that girl out, bro. She's so beautiful, and look how she just fucking kills it on the set, like on that. I don't know what the terminology would be on the kit or whatever, right? Look how good she plays. Like, I mean, I noticed the guitar playing immediately. Like,
yeah, and if they were just four singers, well, then you're just in the marketplace of pretty girls, and there's a million of them. Like
I was going to say, if they were unattractive, do you think that they would have been told to drop the instruments? Of course not. That tells you all you need to know right there.
Yeah, no, and for them, their attractiveness was always like the cherry on top, like that. And I think they wanted to make that like they didn't hide from that, and that was what they said. Like with the interview requests,
the only
thing they wouldn't do were like, because they did tons of photo shoots, they wouldn't do more like seductive type of photo shoots. For them, the appeal was more, it was just there. Like you had, and again, because they're doing the style that men usually do of like, no, we're here on conquest. We're here to take over. We're not necessarily here to be leered at. You're here to come with me, is kind of their entire attitude.
Yeah, that's I don't really know how to react to that because I just don't think it's accurate. Or I don't know that was a wise move, I guess is the way I'll say it. Well, I don't know. It's a really tough subject to talk about because when you objectify people, it's gnarly, dude. Like it's gnarly, but it's also there's a humongous benefit to having those features. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, as the person that's involved in it, how do you approach that? Do you take the high road, quote unquote, and not do that, or do you go ahead and use what you've got while you've got it and try to get ahead of the pack enough so that when that catches up to you, it doesn't matter? Maybe I'm thinking like an old man. I don't know. That's just the way that I would approach it. It's like, well, you've got this opportunity, take it while you can, and then when time catches up to you, which it will do, it doesn't matter anymore. Now you've gotten the respect because it took the eyeballs looking at your cleavage to get you the ears to listen to your music. You know what I'm saying?
I think it's what you want to be known for. Really, is probably what that comes. I don't want to say like someone who wants to get noticed for aesthetic things doesn't want to be, or there's no integrity in that. Like I don't like when that conversation gets framed as integrity versus non. I just think like with someone like the Donnas specifically, they wanted to be known as rock music. Like that's why like very, very specifically, they wanted that to be their legacy and how they're known to the world. So I think that's why they would have shied away from it a little. I think they wanted to earn their stripes and like the most, you know, like they didn't want that as to be maybe because people will say, oh, they're here because of that. I think was sure what it was.
But that comes with the territory. You have to be willing to deal with that. I don't think it was the wisest decision, but there's a certain amount of integrity and character that comes along with it. So it's like a double-edged sword. Like I'm like, I don't know that I was the smartest choice, but I respect it a lot more. You know what I'm saying? It's such a honestly kind of touchy topic to even really talk about. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and think of the stakes here because they were older at this point.
Steak.
So steaks are really good. By older, I mean they're like 22. You know what I mean?
That's
so
so ridiculous.
You're trying to make these major career and life decisions with these corporations and it's like you can't even rent a car.
That's gotta be yeah, dude. There's no way I would want to be dealing with that kind of pressure. I'm so glad that I'm just a fat guy that does
underachieving has really paid off for me when I look and I break down some of the traps of success here. I just never have to worry about any of that. Yeah.
Dude, it's a wild thing. I appreciate this band quite a bit. And the more you're telling me about them, the more I'm realizing that I was on the right path. Because I'll be honest, dude, I got some grief for being a fan of this band. Whenever Spend the Night came out, what year did that come out, dude? Let me look that up real quick. I think it was early 2000s. It had to be. This was 99. Yeah. So 2002. So I was 20 years old. What else was I listening to back then? Obviously Rancid. Yeah, so I was like balls deep in street punk, right? But I couldn't help it, dude. It was so catchy, man. Like it was so well played, well produced, catchy, great lyrics. This is literally like the dude's best option for a lady band, in my opinion. Like it doesn't get better than this. Well, you have stuff like, have you heard Bandmade before? I think these dudes, like these gals, walked so Bandmade could run. Bandmade is they literally is spelled out MAID, like they dress up in maid outfits, and I think they're Korean. I think they might be Japanese, but they play like rock and roll. Like, dude, I would love for you to hear them one of these days, and you're gonna go, oh my goodness, dude, the Donnas, like so much, like it's pretty wild. Anyways, I love this band. I got a lot of crap for liking them in the early 2000s.
Yeah, and they don't borrow from Riot Girl as much as because
Gilman
was a big Riot Girl scene, and they are.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Yeah. Very good point, because those two things do clash. They were okay with talking about blowjobs, and they would wear tight clothes and eat a lollipop in front of you, whereas Riot Girl stuff is more not even close to that. I mean, obviously, right? But not that they were trying to be. You said it was a gimmick, dude. It wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I again, think of it more as like an alter ego, like in hip hop. There's always like these alter egos.
Yeah, no. That's what I'm kind of getting at.
Yeah, and again, that's literally that's what the Ramones were. Their real names weren't all
except
Ramones.
That they became those guys. Like they were, so it's
they
like
had to sort of embody that. Yeah,
but like you said, they were trying to get away from this, and then they did that one. Was it called Gold Record or whatever? No, that's a Bouncing Souls thing. I don't know what it was called. Man, I thought, dude, for some reason, I was
Gold Medal. Gold Medal.
That's
the one that
I was
tanks.
close.
Yeah,
I was close. That one was a pretty bad record, actually.
Yeah, that's again when they just that was okay. Every one of these, we talk about it all the time. Every one of these bands has to have their grown up album that they put out, and either like it takes and you become the biggest star in the world, and people never remember you were from any form of punk rock, or it just completely hits the skids, despite it being, the best work of your career and all this. And then you go back to your other genre of music. And then 20 years later, you go on interviews and say how that was your best music, but no one appreciated. That's the cycle everyone
Isn't that weird?
Gone through. Yeah. It's just this, like, it's hard. You get typecast, right? And
yes.
You just, I don't want to hear about like some of these more serious or grown up topics from people. I want to hear about immaturity from. It's different with some bands that you do grow with over years, but when I'm talking about growth over years, it doesn't hit you how old some of these guys are sometimes. You know what I mean? That they're a few years older than you, so they're hitting those. You just think they're going to be 22 forever because you've been listening to that same record forever. Now, I appreciate a little more in bands like we're going to talk about a little bit that I
was just going to say that they did it probably about as perfect as you could do
because,
it. I have all the records.
I have got old with them in the course of 20 years as well, and that sort of thing. And I can mirror that when it's in these shorter, what we view as shorter time spans. Because we forget, like some of these songs you guys have had in their bedroom for years. So maybe we're just hearing it on this album.
Yeah.
They're sick of it. They've moved on to something else, and so
it is what it is, dude. I mean, can you imagine having a song like All the Small Things? Can you imagine that? Like how much you would hate that song by now?
That's why all the bands hate their big, hit song, because it's been. As fans, you get sick of the hit songs. Can you imagine having to play it on tour every single night?
Oh yeah, for sure, man. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I didn't know what we were going to really talk about because the album zips by, dude. It's done so fast.
Yeah, I sat down with the notepad and I had trouble like making notes because it was just like you said. I enjoyed listening to it. I would say too, one little note on it is the Ramones thing is so pronounced that there's actually in the later songs, there's like late 80s Ramon stylings on there as well. Like the entirety, it's not just the 70s first record Ramones that are represented. It's a lot of like that band's entire career. It's a good access.
They do parallel the Ramones all the way through their career.
Even like a lot of the stuff I said is kind of 80s metalish. Like the Ramones actually inspired a lot of that stuff as well and injected a lot of that into the 80s. The Ramones went all over the place. Basically trying to
they did,
and they have a lot of this stuff, and I can appreciate the album in a band that is just so eclectic. I think that's the best way to describe. They were a gimmick and joke band, and they could put on any sort of suit, and they were pretty good at any one of those suits they put on.
Well, they had the last two things that I wrote down was the chugging riff on "Searching the Streets" is great. It sounds like some hot rod rock. She's got a dark side and she's searching for fresh meat. And I put, oh, wow, LOL. Not 100% sure what she's referring to there, but in 1999, I would have definitely thought it was dirty. And then I put, oh, man, this guitar riff from I Didn't Like You Anyway is awesome. This is an angry, heartbroken song about hurting and refusing to admit it. Such a great breakup song. Maybe my favorite song on the whole album. The guitar solo in this one. Man, this song rips. The lyrics are pretty juvenile, but that's the exact way you feel in these kind of situations. Like they're very relatable, especially to young people. This album, this band, all the way up through their probably last album or whatever, or their I guess second to last, whatever it was. They had juvenile lyrics that were so incredibly relatable, especially to young boys. Honestly, you could listen to this and think about the girl you had a crush on and be like, I wonder if she's thinking this stuff about me. I mean, that's how much this feels like a high school record. It feels like a party in 1989. The whole record feels like a party.
It really does. It's the ultimate record that too. If like, just put on that Donnas record if you're hanging out with people because everyone could enjoy it. It's funny. You would laugh at it. It's upbeat except for that one song you just mentioned. It's a good listen. Like I'm glad we did that. I would never have a reason to go back and listen to the Donnas if it wasn't for really having this conversation. So I'm kind of glad we did it because it's good and it should get its recognition. And I think like some of the stuff I mentioned about Lookout should be sort of just known because I think it's a piece of history that enters our world, even though they're not really a big part of our world.
Well, so just like when I brought up Weezer, I know this is the punk rock review, but it could also be looked at as like I'm a punk rocker reviewing things. It doesn't always have to be exclusively punk rock. Although I will say I don't really want to do like hip hop or like a lot of metal stuff. It's got to be kind of in the same family tree. But dude, the Donnas need some recognition. And where else do they fit? Right? They're not going to fit on a metal channel. Maybe a classic rock channel, but not really. They fit on a punk channel. Weezer fits on a punk channel. This is subculture music that branched off the punk rock family tree, and I really enjoyed their music a lot. And I've been on like a Ramones core kick lately, which is where I was thinking about the Donnas, and so there's not a lot of lady-led bands out there that I like as much. Also, we did the dude. Why I keep wanting to say Riverdale's. Last week we did what was the Ramones?
We did Pinhead Gunpowder. Yeah.
Oh no, the week before that then we did what is the freaking band called? The Ramones core band we did. It wasn't Riverdale's. God dang it. This is gonna drive me nuts. Hold on. Why can I not remember? Dude, my brain is just fried on memory.
We did Jawbreaker, but I don't know if we'd consider them Ramones core.
Teen Idols, dude.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I keep wanting to say Riverdale's, but my brain was going Riverdale's, but I was looking at the Teen Idols album cover in my head. So they had a lady in the band, was my point, is that they had a lady in the band who did a little bit of vocals, and I thought, that's really great. Donna's is just like full-fledged a female band, which I think I'm doing a women in punk video at some point, probably in the fall, and I'm a little worried that I'm going to fuck that up, but I'm going to put my best foot forward, and the Donnas will definitely get a mention in that video. I think all these bands my point is that some of these bands that were popular that aren't anymore deserve to get talked about, man. The Donnas need a spotlight, dude. This band is beloved.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If you were popular and had a fall, it's almost like you didn't exist. So like some of the bands we listened to never got to that peak, so they never have like the big fall, and they just have the normal lifespan of the band.
Right.
Some of like if a band was big, we think of like, oh, what happened? You know what I mean? Or like,
when nothing happened, they just kind of slowly declined in their enormous popularity, but they still probably make music. They're probably still involved to some degree.
Yeah, like with the Donnas, I don't know. They turned 25. That's
right.
What happened.
Yeah, one of them got a job at a real career. I don't know. Maybe she became a freaking lawyer or something. They're pretty intelligent by all accounts.
They actually had there's a break in the album cycles early on because like getting out of high school, they had to make a decision, and they all decided to go to college for one half of a year just to put that. And it was funny because you can imagine like their parents were involved, like everyone had to meet together because it's these like 17-year-old girls like, hey, I know like we're on this like cool label and stuff, but what are we going to do with our lives? And again, it's not like you're one of these major pop acts that's going to, finishing school from home or something. So the collective made an agreement to go to college for like one half of a year
that's amazing.
To set that up.
Before we wrap up on Donna's talk, how do you feel about this record? Did you get to listen to it this week?
Yeah, I listened to it a few times. I would put it. I think it's for what it is. It's done extremely, extremely well. I think the songs are extremely fun. It's not. It's something I do feel is still more novelty though than like really great music in the sense that like I just want to put it on all the time and.
So is that how you feel about bands like the Queers too? I'm just curious.
The Queers I feel a little more. Not as critical of in that sort of sense. Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, I do it, and there's a lot of
because that's like the exact description I have of the Queers, and not for the Donnas, but I was like, that's close enough though.
Yeah, and it just to me the Donnas are enough of a gimmick and always kind of have been that I have to be sort of reminded of them and to be like I don't necessarily seek them out, and even listening to this again, probably not going to listen to it again honestly for a long while. I'm glad I did. I'm glad I have it fresh in my knowledge, but it's not something that necessarily piques my interest or is for me. Like I guess because I didn't get into it at the time. I think that kind of
Facts.
plays
That
into
that
it
that
too.
that'll make it real difficult to get extremely motivated to listen to
It's
it
a
again.
youth specific music. I think that's why like people who've never heard pop punk think you're crazy if you like it if you're around our age versus if you've heard it since kind of the inception or when it came out or when you were younger, it doesn't have quite that same weird connotation to it.
Well, I was definitely a fan of this band back when probably not around this album. I think Turn 21 is when I really was introduced to them. I don't think I heard Get Skintight till later, to be honest about it. But I was a fan of them around this era. Like definitely when Spin the Night came out, I already knew who they were. I'd already seen them play. I already knew who. I think I already had Turn 21, which I don't think is even close to as good as this album. I think this album is superior, and I think Spin the Night is probably better than all of them. It's just it's so well produced. It's a lot more polished. It's honestly, it's like comparing Enema of the State to like Dude Ranch and Cheshire Cat and stuff. So we'll be talking about that in just a second. Before we talk Blink 182, let me run into the restroom real quick. I'll be back in 20 seconds.
Okay.
Oh, shit. Oh, man, almost tripped on my head. Where did Sorry for the noise. Man, one of the beautiful things about having this office in the master bedroom is that if I have to go take a pee break real quick, it is literally real quick.
Right there.
All right, dude. Let's go, man. I am kind of excited to talk about an album that I didn't think I would be that excited to talk about. Oh, man. So did you get to listen to this album at all this week?
I listened to it once. I don't really need to, though. You know what I mean? Like
okay.
It's pretty embedded, you know.
Right. So, okay. It's time to talk about the greatest pop punk record of all time. I stand on that. I will not back down from that. Dude, the reason that I'm going to call it the greatest pop punk record of all time is for this reason right here. The whole week, I just kept putting it off listening to it because I was like, dude, I don't need to hear it. Like you said, it's embedded in my brain. I don't need to hear this record. I know all the songs. I sat down today to put together some equipment that I bought, and I was like, all right, time to listen to this. I turned on the speakers. They're real loud right behind me. I got a good stereo in here. Dude, it took maybe half a second of Dumpweed, and I was like, okay, I'm back in. I was like, I'm back in, bro. I'm back in. I literally have a video of me putting together this thing, and I'm like looking up, singing almost every single word to almost every single song. Dude, this record is amazing. I can't get sick of it. Like, I don't, like, if you tell me like, hey, do you want to go listen to it? It's kind of hard to get motivated, right? But as soon as it starts, I'm like, dude, I go transportation back in time to 1999. So what we're talking about, if you haven't figured out yet, is Blink 182, Enema of the State, June 1st, 1999. It'll be 25 years old in like 10 days, dude. 12 songs, 35 minutes of pop punk perfection. On that date, I will be doing a live stream. We're going to listen to it. Artist Spotlight will be Blink 182, Enema of the State. This album is so good that it's got like 3 or 4 songs that have been massively overplayed, and I still like listening to them. Again, it's a little hard to want to jump in, but as soon as I've jumped in, I'm enjoying myself.
You said jump in too. It goes so quickly. You read those times of 38 minutes. This album it kicks, especially you talk about the notable songs and all that. They come at the end towards the bottom of the album. So you start out with a lot of these funner songs that I think are the heart of what makes this just a great album. Because again, these three songs that were massive pop hits, like not rock hits, just massive pop hits.
Yeah,
this
just
album was
music in general. Yeah,
it was just huge. But like, you kind of feel like had they not have selected those three and selected every other song on the album, those also would have been massive hits. There's not, I would say, in my opinion, the lowest point on the album is probably its biggest hit. And I remember saying that even at the time, because these songs,
all the small things.
Yeah, I think it's the weakest song on the album. And I've thought that for a long time. Yeah.
Hold on, let me look at this.
But again, it's contrasted with the rest of the album, like contrasted to what else.
I mean, I like it better than a bunch of songs, but I do understand your point that you're making, and I'm not going to agree with it, but I'm also not going to argue against it. Really,
I mean, all the small things really works as a radio hit. It's very sing-alongable. It's all of those sort of things. Last song they recorded for the album too. It was their it was their throw-in song, wanting to do a Ramones type of thing. And they said, let's put in this song and it's, if you've ever played the song on guitar bass,
it does sound kind of like Ramones. It's just slowed down a little bit. But if it's faster, it would sound like Ramones.
Yeah, it's exactly has all that. And most of their chord progressions are like, again, a band that's not a Ramones chord band at all, but all of their chord progressions throughout the first part of their career are really all that same that sort of Ramones progression.
Yeah. I just wrote a Ramones score song.
Like a Blitzkrieg bop right there, right out of you. But yeah,
let's start a band, Rob.
All the small things is kind of that, you know what I mean? And it's funny. And that was like, maybe the third song that I remember coming out. I remember catching this album at the time. And it's because What's My Age Again was like the biggest song like ever whenever it came out. And it was a little racy. It was a little fun. It really just, it fits so well though. This band and this album fit really well into the time period that they burst into. Like,
Bro,
I don't know how much
that lightning struck for this band.
Yeah, like, because think of everything that's going on. Whether it's the type of the movies that were coming out, like those teen comedies that they were always in soundtrack for. You have the X Games really rising up in this part, and they were big in the skate scene and the San Diego scene. So they're coded. So all these big pieces, and then the other music that already came, all these big pieces of culture were kind of coalescing around them. Also, and the Donnas from earlier were a part of this. There was a specific move within MTV in the late 90s to go away from the boy bands, because the boy bands were kind of falling off a little bit, and they realized they needed to replace their audience with what are the young kids going to be listening to now. And so the calculation by MTV was that the public had moved on from boy bands and into punk rock bands, and they weren't that far off. I think they were absolutely correct in how that was going to go and how it facilitated it, which is funny about this album. So this album is very colorful. I think blue is just the sort of general theme, red, white, and blue really is the theme color. The reason why the next album,
specific shade of blue though,
it's that blink
blue,
not like
a pale blue.
It's like a blink blue. Yeah, and someone even did a mock-up of some Jordan 1s with the Enema colors one day. Like, those looked amazing.
Yes, but
that is why the next album has a black cover. They're dressed in black the whole time, because it was so colorful, so digestible, so bubblegum. People would casually, without saying it as an insult, would refer to Blink-182 as a boy band, as a boy group. Which, again, this band that is playing, but to them, and we're like, wait a minute, we're the band that's making fart songs and playing NoFX covers, and like that's what we don't even know how to play our instruments. But yeah, now functionally, were they a boy band? Yes, they did very, very much serve that role that a boy band would serve. They had a slightly different audience, but not much. You know what I mean? It's not.
Yes, that's accurate. I can't. Yeah, yes, you're correct. But this, I don't want to just like shift the conversation here, but I have to, man. This album is special. It's a timeless record. Every time I think I'm over it, I get pulled right back in. That's crazy to me that an album could be this good. It's one of those things that when you hear Dude Ranch, and you're like, okay, Dude Ranch is easily the best Blink album. Within like 2 songs of Enema, you're like, oh my goodness, dude, how could they have done better. Like that band created a better record is kind of hard to comprehend when you're just looking at it from the perspective of Dude Ranch, right? The addition of Travis Barker, some more money, and like the production of this record is where it's special because they slowed some of the songs down, which I don't necessarily like, but it works. Listen to like All the Small Things, the song that you said is beaten to death, right? What about that song is notable to you?
I don't know, probably just like the speed and the energy.
Okay, so one of the things about that song that is incredibly important, in my opinion, is that if you're somewhere and you know that ambient noise they have at the beginning of the song,
Yeah.
Okay, without that ambient noise, excuse me, and that hi-hat snare drum, like that sets that song apart. So when you're somewhere, dude, you can hear that little intro noise and know exactly what's fixing to come. Dude, it's that kind of detail that sets this album apart from any other record I've ever heard. Because, like, I'll be at work, dude, at this freaking theater, and I'll hear that noise and go, ooh, Blink's fixing to come on. I've heard that song 2 million times, but I don't need to hear it again. But at work, man, what else do I want to hear? I'd rather hear that than almost anything else.
Yeah, the swell from the end of Adam's song, which again,
yes, that's what it is. Thank you. Sorry,
this album though really goes together as an album like that.
It really does.
The songs tend to bleed in together. There's drum fills, and you mentioned it. There's 2 major upgrades that they make on this album. The one that everyone knows about, obviously, is Travis Barker, and so that's why this is also like the last really super pop punky album that they ever did, because their sound changes because of Travis. Like Travis is the one that pulls them into all their different directions. I think Mark and Tom, although wanting to go in different directions, would have probably just made this album over and over and over again had it just been them and Scott. The other one,
I think they should have.
Yeah, that might have been good for them. The other one, and I talk about it all the time, was the entrance of the legendary Jerry Finn. Now, a couple weeks ago, Steve Albini passed away. Someone who mixed, and produced, engineered, worked on everything. Well, someone else who has passed on is Jerry Finn, who's very similar to Steve Albini in that, like, his credits are huge. His production credits aren't that big. I always say this is his crown jewel of everything he did produce. Because Enema of the State is such a perfect sounding record. On top of it,
it really, dude, songs, it sounds so
pretty. Like it's just like, taking what you have on Dude Ranch and putting that into like a super production kind of thing. And this is what you get. Like some bands, if you produce them, they won't sound the same, or they won't, like, this is clearly still whatever a Blink-182 is. And now it's hard to say that now because, like, you just know what they are. Whatever it is, it's still very much that on Enema of the State. It sounds cleaner and crisper than it did even on any other albums after, because they started more experimentation after and stuff. So it was never going to sound as clean, crisp, and pure as it ever was on Enema of the State. But they are simple punk rock songs that you go in and there's so many layers to them and so many little different parts of production parts. We talked about, like, watching the Rick Beato videos on these, where he pulls out the keyboard
awesome.
in all the small things that you can't even hear it on the recording, but you can pull it out deeply in the recording. That's just thickening it up. Them doing counter harmonies lyrically underneath the stuff that they're singing, and having them do it so it's in their tone, their intonation. Having Mark shift from the Fender basses to the Jaguar basses. This is all like that Jerry Finn stuff. Again,
that's like very specific calculated moves.
Dude Ranch is a very, like, Dude Ranch is an album that I think is an upper end album because those songs are really, really good, but kind of an album that a punk rock band would make. I don't think most punk rock bands would just have the intuition or the know-how or the time or the money to make something like Enema. And again, it's little stuff like, the guitar's not going to play her and just the bass is going to play her. And that's how verse 2 is going to be different than verse 1. And just those little things about making a record that Jerry Finn, he had a real affinity.
You mean all the small things?
All the small things. Yes. All those little details. That's actually, I think it was Jerry's thing, is he had an affinity of, how do I make this music that is supposed to be really generic, so to speak, and how do I make it unique, and how do I make it and like Rick Beato said, this is one of the greatest rock records, just full stop, of all time. The way it's a perfect rock record, big choruses, the things you want, the hits, the right amount of ballads. Dude, it's kind of a perfect record.
So when I was listening to it, I had it on Spotify, and all of a sudden the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones came on, and I was like, what? That's how fast this record is. That's how easy it is to listen to. Is that all of a sudden I was listening to a different band because the album was over with, and I was like, but I wasn't quite ready to be done with that yet. Like I almost put it back on, but I was in the middle of doing stuff. I couldn't really stop what I was doing. But like honestly, had I been sitting here editing video or something, I would have probably been like, nah, let's do that one more time. And it's not a hard record to listen to. One thing that you said a minute ago that I want to touch on for a minute. That sounded super pervy. One thing I want to touch on for a minute, Rob. These nuts. Bro, I'm never going to grow up, man. I tried that shit one time. So the addition of Travis Barker into Blink-182 changed them in a way that I don't think a lot of people really think about much, because they think, Mark wanted to go this direction, Tom wanted to go this direction, and they never really mentioned Travis Barker. But do you think that Travis Barker's to blame for the direction that Blink went as far as like getting them out of punk rock almost altogether? They went like straight up emo, almost like to like electronic music to a certain degree. For years, they've never really gone back to it. Honestly, is he to blame for that?
Yeah, very very much. And I think if you ask them what their sound is, not now, like just currently, but what the Blink sound is, they would say it is that sort of like that. They are happy with how that went. No, and it's 100% from him. So you look at like part of why Travis started the Transplants is he said he wanted to get punk rockers into hip hop rhythms. And I think he actually kind of accomplished that a little bit with Blink-182 as well. But the moods and the tone, they all wanted to do it. That's why, again, this is the last album of like purity that they have.
Yeah, I can't imagine that they didn't want to and still did, but like he was the catalyst, correct?
Yeah. Well, so he not only the catalyst but the capabilities too. Like he just had different.
Right.
So when they talk about where they wanted to go, I think Mark just wanted to lean into them being even more of like a bubblegummy pop. I guess the stuff that would kind of feature him. I mean, let's be honest with you,
stuff he's good at.
Yeah, Tom wanted them to be a heavier band, a more of a post-hardcore type of band. A lot of the stuff you sort of heard with Boxcar Racer and
Boxcar Racer is where I was headed. Yeah,
that's the direction he wanted to go to. And Travis, wanted this completely different, totally like almost trippy sort of version of the band. And they have talked about like Travis was so much more knowledgeable on both like music history and music theory and all of this stuff than they did. So as soon as he joined the band, they really took the lead from him in how Mark and Tom still wrote the majority of the songs to start out with, and they've talked about this now. The process is Mark and Tom basically send Travis and Mark, or Tom and Mark, they send basically demos to Travis, and Travis literally that kind of chops and screws it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then sends them back to him like what the song is gonna be like. So he has very much influence over the sound. I don't think it was necessarily on display on his, other than it was just the quality of him was so much on display, and the stuff that Jerry could do to these songs was very much on his. I think his influence comes out 2 albums later when you have. I
would agree. Yeah, I
not
think
only
that's accurate.
the shift in emo, because not like he was this big emo guy necessarily, but that's sort of
but he put complex like strategy into like making generic simple songs.
Yeah,
so he turned it into something completely different.
Like that 03 album has a rhythm interlude. You know what I mean? Like you just didn't have that on pop punk albums. So he brought that, but that rhythm change to your broader question, I think really brought about all the permission for all the tonal changes in, like if they wanted to do a song with Robert Smith of The Cure, which they did on the 2003 album, he wasn't going to come on there and guest on all the small things necessarily for that type of style.
That is a very, very good point. Now, I don't particularly care for all that, but I understand from an artist standpoint, wanting to do that, of course, right? There's a couple of points that have to be talked about, though. One is the talent. Dude, what a winning lottery ticket you got to get Travis Barker to join your band, because he was doing stuff like the Aquabats, bro. That guy needs to be very far away from that kind of music and be in just so he can spread his wings. Like, I'm not trying to talk crap about the Aquabats, dude. I learned to listen to Aquabats in later Blink-182 albums, but the amount of professionalism, and if you would go based on the eye test, you would go, oh, that's the punk rock guy, but in reality, it's probably Mark.
It's probably Tom, actually. Is
you think so?
I think it's between Mark and Tom are
But my point is that Travis looks like the guy that would be the more punk rock guy.
Yeah,
and he's probably got the more knowledge on it, but he's very
Mark and
much
Tom
eclectic.
Are you and I basically?
That's true. That's true.
They would be you and I. Yeah, Travis always had, because he had the mohawk. He was the first one with the tattoos.
He's covered in tattoos.
He had that, and he has a lot of punk rock tattoos on him though, specifically too. And it's not like he wasn't a punk rocker, not from punk rock scene.
No. He very much is, but he's also a musician.
He had that interest again, and I think it's funny to say because you don't associate Blink with hip, but it was specifically, and not hip hop always, but like hip hop makes sense because that's where rhythms come. So like we talk about these, but Tommy Lee. The reason why Tommy Lee has a hip hop record is hip hop kind of appeals to drummers. I think the beats and the rhythm and all that stuff. It's something they feel. I think, I don't know if I need to have a creative, but like the rhythm is at the forefront of hip hop. That is the musicianship in hip hop. Is the rhythm. I think guys like Travis really understood how rhythm creates a song and can add to the color of the song and all that. So that's why he wanted to bring in the hip hop beats, and he did it in a few different ways. He did it with the way of changing up Blink's sound. He did it with the transplants, with the just transparent, where I'm gonna bang out a hip hop sounding beat, and there's gonna be hip hop like lyrics and stuff on top of it.
Well, Tim Armstrong is very aware of that world, and I wouldn't say like entangled into it, but he's aware of it, and he's like, I would say he's the kind of guy that stands in the back like this at a show in that world. He's like, okay, I like this, I can dig this. Whereas Travis is probably, Travis is like in the mix. It's a weird connection and relationship that punk rock and hip hop have together. We've always kind of had it, mainly because I think they're both birthed of like rebellion and like for the desire and the need to fix a lot of problems in society and with lawmakers and police, right? So that's where these connections are made. So then you have these musicians that are interested in both sides, and you get wild music out of it. And I like a lot of it. Some of it I don't care for, but Travis Barker is an amazing musician. I just wanted to point out the fact that like his musical ability is far above, I would say, the other two guys in the band. I don't mean to sound like a jerk.
And they would say that as well. Like they would say that by far. Like they always say, they're the lucky guy. They're the cliche lucky guys that kind of knew how to play their instruments. And that awesome. Undersells them a little bit because they can write. They've always been able to just write really good songs. That is.
No, they're very good at writing catchy music for sure.
That is, but, sure. Mark's not the best bass player. Tom's not the best guitar player. This is that. Travis is the best drummer. Like Travis is all of those things. And I think that's where this album, like, you listen to some of these songs, just the drum tracks, and it almost sounds like the entire song. Like it's amazing how much activity he's doing.
I 1,000,000% agree with that. I just wanted to ask that specific question because I think that I thought about it honestly in the first song. So I have a pretty good stereo now. Before, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, I didn't have this good of a stereo. And I was able to like turn it up quite a bit and fool with the equalizer a little bit. And I paused it, turned around, leaned over, turned the treble down a little bit, turned the mids up, and then I turned the bass up just a hair because I wanted to get all the drum sounds because I heard it so clearly on this album. Like I think that is he to blame for things? The way I'll come around on this question is I'll say that he was so good at it and he is so talented that it actually became too much of a good thing with their most recent album. And his production was like they needed somebody to step in and help, but he's so good at what he does. He's so trusted that they were like, here, you do this then. And I think they would have probably benefited from having somebody else in there going, hey, man, maybe not so much on this. And hey, tone this down a little bit. Because it does sound like the Travis Barker Show on their new record. So I do think that he's to blame for the way that they ended up and the sounds that they make now. Now, to blame, that could be taken as a negative or positive. I'm just saying, is he the catalyst to their sound change? Yeah, you can look at it any way you want. I'm just saying, is he the reason for their sound changing the way it did? And I would say, yes, he absolutely is.
Let me just interject how funny it is that, like, when I was, this album came out when I was, like, in the 7th grade, right? So I was pretty familiar with it, like, just generally. And we used to, like, we thought Travis was cool because he wouldn't talk in interviews, and he was the most low-profile one of all that. I love how now he's the biggest celebrity of all three.
Isn't that
he's
weird?
Like the guy who like determines their musicianship. He's the most in tune with music of all of them because he works with all these modern artists. It's so funny that he's like this massive mogul dude now, and he used to be the quiet guy that wouldn't talk. From
that's how you get there, bro.
So funny.
Shut up. That's why I'll never get there, because I can't shut up.
You just stay where you're at.
But dude, Travis Barker rules, man. I really appreciate that guy's musicianship and talent and ear for like quality sounds. I mean, it's really. Can you imagine how difficult it is to be in his position, and especially if you're like, hey, we're gonna get together and write this new album, and hey, Travis, we want you to produce it. I'd be like, man, hell no, I don't want to be the reason that people are pissed or the reason people celebrate. Let me just be a part of the band, please. Like I'll give my expertise where it's needed, but I don't want that kind of pressure. Is really what it is. It's a cowardly move on my part, but I'll just have to deal with it.
He feels like the first like real legend double career guy out of pop punk. You know what I mean? Like Billy Joel and those guys, they're still kind of going as they're like who they were. Like there's almost like this Dr. Dre kind of like he's the hip hop guy in the 80s, then he's the producer in the 90s. There's that kind of thing that Travis has to him as well. I think he's the only guy really from like that still kind of could be identified that came from punk or that sort of has that cachet like in pop culture.
Yeah, but first, but he's like he walked so Travis could run.
Yeah, and Tim may have done more specific work in the music industry. Travis was a lot more famous, obviously, than Tim.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of wrestling with it, but I still think
they're both guys though. If you want a hit record, if you're anywhere adjacent to punk or even
if you can get one of those two guys on your song, you're all right.
Put them on your thing.
Well, that's why the Transplants were so fucking good, and so original, dude. How many? Oh, dude, look. How often can you say that you hear a sound that you've never heard before? Not very often. And I think Tim Armstrong was
still, like
Tim Armstrong did that shit twice, bro. Like Rancid and the Transplants. Shit, Operation Ivy, dude. He's a triple threat, man. He did that actually I never really thought about that, dude. Like how many people can say that they changed music 3 different times? Not many, man. Tim Armstrong, he did it with Operation Ivy. Then he did it with Rancid, and then he did it with the Transplants. And I am not saying this at all with like any kind of like. I'm being very serious. He really did change shit 3 different times, man. That's crazy. I never really thought about it like that.
In 3 different decades too, yeah.
In 3 different decades. Wow, that's crucial, man. That is a wild statement. Yeah, dude. This is. The only other band you were saying that they're still holding that spot for like that unique sound. The only band that I've ever heard that I thought, oh man, this could remind me of the Transplants a little bit. There's actually 2. One's like over in Europe, Rat Boy. He has a lot of that similar sound in his music, but Co-Defendants are the closest thing that I've ever heard to a Transplant song, and they're still not the same.
Yeah.
But it's the closest thing that I've ever heard.
Because you're like, okay, well, they combined the punk rock and hard rock with hip hop, but it's not new metal. It's not, it's hard to explain.
Right.
Like
it is a weird.
There's nothing really you could other than who's involved that you would say is overtly punk rock necessarily about the Transplants. They fit in there with it because nothing else really would sound like being told that they're punk rock doesn't seem like crazy. But like you wouldn't come to that conclusion necessarily, I think, on your own.
Well, I definitely called them punk rock hip hop. That's like Co-Defendants, I think, fit in the same category. And I think that maybe if there's another couple of bands that come out that actually do something with it, you might have a subgenre pop up that's like that you can thank Tim Armstrong for again.
I'm surprised it hasn't. The way hip hop has kind of taken over as the pop music and has infected like all the other. I mean, it's been parts of punk rock there, but not like this. Of really like a not strip, but like a more hardcore type of punk rock that's directly associated with it,
If you're gonna start a band like that, right, and like your idea is I want to do something that sounds like this, and they go, okay, what are the bands that you want to try to emulate or replicate, sound like, whatever you want to call it, and your answer is the Transplants or fucking Co-Defendants, dude. Like, I know that Co-Defendants aren't as big as Transplants, but that's Sam King and Chesky Ramos, dude. Like, that's big. That's talent. So that's a daunting task. Is my point. Like, I'd be like, you know what? I'll just play a punk band, bro. I'm not even trying to get embarrassed right now. Like, I don't want to make a fool of myself, because the people that did it just so happen to be the best people that could have done something like that. That's what makes it so crazy, is that that's the reason it's not being replicated, because it's like, well, dude, the best guys already did that. So, and anybody watching this, if there's a band out there that sounds kind of like that I don't know about, dude, let me know. I'd love to hear
put
it.
them out. Yeah.
I think that you know, this is gonna sound crazy, bro. The one band that if they were still around could probably pull it off would probably be the Clash. They as much as I don't care about their later music, they touched into a lot of genres, and that is exactly why Tim does it. So there's my tip of the cap to the band that I always just kind of go, eh. Like, I'm not trying to. Yeah, bro, I'm exhausted right now. That was a crazy, like, energetic, emotional conversation about a lot of music that we haven't. The Donnas we've never even talked about.
No.
But the Blink album, dude, like, we've talked about it a number of times, but I don't think we really said the same stuff. Like, we reviewed it and talked about the songs we liked, but dude, this album is impactful, man. Think about all the bands that, if Enema of the State didn't come out sounding exactly the way it sounded, that just wouldn't even exist. There's a lot of them, dude.
Well, I wonder what I think about this a lot, because what would that early 2000s scene have sounded like? Because the Green Day stuff
Newfound
had
Glory.
Really though, I think it needed this album though, like.
Okay,
because
you're not wrong.
And again, that may be the case, but like, even if you go to that first album that comes out before this in '97, it's very like rough. I mean, it's still trying to be poppy, but it's it hadn't figured it out. Like I've heard Blink one time be referred to as hardcore pop, and that was such a good descriptor of what their music is.
That is a good descriptor.
That is like perfect to describe exactly what it is. They were so good at doing both things, about writing these really good songs that, again, in any other context you would just consider a straight up punk song, but they were able to present it to you as like this sort of pop music in the way that it would be palatable to, like, you know, your aunt who had the CD or the tape, and also it's not that far removed from like what they were doing on Dude Ranch. And again, they didn't have to get a bunch of hate because they had already got there with Dude Ranch, you know what I mean? Like this, so it's not like if you thought Blink-182 had left you, or you had abandoned them, like it had already ended for you with Dude Ranch, which again, the late 90s just doesn't have. We talked about that with the Donnas too. It doesn't. Green Day had to go through what they went through and sort of open all the floodgates for everyone. And then it just mattered. It only really mattered to like them. Like, it's not like Blink had to get asked in every interview what it was like to leave the punk scene the way that Green Day had to go through. So I really wonder though, the people who don't like who didn't like this album or don't like Blink, I always wonder, like, well, have you ever actually like listened to it? Do you not like the idea of it, or do you not like it as a whole?
I would venture to say that there's going to be a fair amount of people that are going to say that they don't like it, and then if you had to ask them with some truth serum, have you ever listened to the whole album? I would say pretty confidently that it's going to be like a 50-50 split on who hadn't even heard the whole record.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I do know people that say that this album isn't good, that I'm pretty sure haven't actually heard it, and all they heard was the singles and were like, I don't care. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's punk rock guys that have never heard this record. I can guarantee it.
Yeah, because so I wonder about that when they just, like, okay, if you're just gonna have a problem with the concept as a whole, then it's kind of not worth having the conversation, because you've already made up your mind. So why are we gonna have this conversation? But I do understand if your standard is for it just to be like punk rock, straightforward. Then this wouldn't meet your threshold by quite a wide
and
margin.
I wasn't saying that as like a condemnation of their personality or whatever. It's just I do know people that are like, no, it ain't for me, it sucks. And I'm like, but how do you heard it all? They're like, I don't care, I don't want to. Because I feel like that about some stuff too.
That's why again, like, unless you just don't like the idea of the band, or just straight up don't like the band, then I also get that. But it's like, man, these songs are, for what this is, these songs are about as good as they could be, and
Well,
they're done so well. Like a lot of that stuff that this came out of, even their own stuff, even like Dude Ranch. Like as much as I love Dude Ranch, like there's some songs and there's some moments that are really like overstuffed and over bloated. It speaks to what you can do with the spirit and energy and songwriting mixed with the competency of production that an album like this has. Without, again, I always want to say they were not defanged. Like if you don't like the fangs they had, it's because you didn't like the fangs they had. But you know,
right.
those are just the fangs. That's the fangs that they did. So they were not. They found a way to really not. You know, it was not a defanging of them. It was a polishing for sure. And maybe like that polish, then that sheen might just be a little too much for people.
It's a combination of two things. It is, well, actually, it's. Sorry, I thought I was hearing something. It's a combination of three things, actually. I said two things. It's a good new cleaning, good polishing. They also slowed the tempo down a fair amount, right? But it's also the addition of Travis Barker. I have to say it again. His talent, the way he plays the drums on this record is so far superior to Dude Ranch that it's kind of insulting to even compare the two records because they're very different.
I feel bad. I've thought this for a long time. I feel bad for Scott Rayner just because people think he was a terrible drummer because Travis succeeded him. You know what I mean? Like he's
also
fine. Like no,
Blink was lucky and he was unlucky at the same time.
Right now, did some people say, well, he limited the band? Okay, true.
Maybe did he really though?
Well, no, because we're saying that they expanded their sound and were able to do all these other things because they had Travis.
Yeah, but they also didn't want to do it. We already discussed that too. They wanted to sound the same, or at least Mark did. You know, wait,
right?
Yeah, Mark did.
No, but so then again, you would say that they were able to expand and build their. And I'm not just talking about the complete sound change, but actually the way they were able to just have get some of the slower tempos, which comes with the better drummer and the way to fill in those songs. So they had I'm not gonna say Travis wasn't good. We just spent 30 minutes telling you about how good Travis was. I don't think that means some people act like Scott was just hitting the tin can though when they talk about now. Scott, my guy, did you really need to join the San Diego police force last year? Like, did we really need that selfie coming out? Did he really? Yeah, it was like 2 yeyears ago. He's like a swearing in thing. It's a bummer. And again, we talked about it when we did our Blink songs. My favorite Blink song of all time, "Man Overboard," is about Scott. It's about as much insight as we'll ever get to his removal from the band. At the time, they said he was going away to college. That was like the cliche everyone would say in a band. It sounds like he was kicked out for his alcoholism.
Oh, really?
That seems to be, if you read between the lines, that seems to be what has happened. All the way to becoming a San Diego police officer like 3 years ago. That's wild. That's the path that Scott. What a weird life. You drummed on Dude Ranch and now you're a patrolman. That's weird.
That's so insane. He played really fast. I like his drum style, but Travis, I actually prefer his style, but recognize that Travis is the better musician.
Yeah, and I wonder too, like they probably just didn't. It's not. I don't think they like deferred to him much. You know what I mean? Like I wonder how much influence he really had over their sound. If it was just Mark and Tom at the time, and again bringing in Travis, and they talk about how like Travis changed their whole mindset on just like on a real conceptual basis. Like they said like he thought he always brought a hip hop attitude, even with like their imagery and all that. Like he just had that.
That's racist.
He had that sort of just knowledge. He thought about music from that perspective. Of how they would market it, how they would monetize, like all of those sort of things. He always he did
bring a different perspective to it. I mean, that's exactly what he brought. Talent.
And because Mark and Tom, like I said, they really were just they were kind of second generation punk rockers, right? They're guys of that age that are growing up with the a little bit of the 80s stuff. They were a little bit younger than some of these other guys, so they liked like the Pennywises and the NoFXs. Were still, even though basically they're same age, they were still old enough band to them to look up to them,
I feel like Travis Barker might have been like the Ritalin that calmed them down and got them focused on what they needed to do. Because can you imagine what their career would have been like had he not joined the band?
They'd been like Guttermouth or something like that. Like
yeah. Or Lagwagon maybe. Well, they're not as good musicians as Lagwagon.
Yeah, I think Lagwagon
Travis is.
I mean they certainly looked up to Lagwagon. So during
Right.
Dude Ranch, I tell the story the whole time. They were opening for Lagwagon, and Joey Cape was like, I think you guys need to leave this tour and go on your own. You're selling like, 'cause
That's
Dude
crazy.
Dude Ranch was successful. That's the thing about them.
Yes.
Like, they're not
Dude,
a
damn
band
it is a huge song.
that busted on their like they just came into this major label signing. Like they were the album, everyone was very happy with Dude Ranch. It's not like one of those things like, oh, they bombed on the major and they had to pull it together. It was just, they did well enough to, quite frankly, earn a budget for their next album as well
That's
to
awesome.
do this. Now nobody had the idea that this album, I think, would be as big as it was, because again, Dude Ranch was good, but it was still a punk rock album by a punk rock band. And if you weren't Green Day selling Dookie or what the Offspring were doing, you just didn't really, wasn't even really like a major career, like a sustainable, you're going to do this your whole life kind of thing. Obviously Enema just changed all of that for Blink and for a lot of other bands, actually.
Let's wrap this conversation up with the age-old question.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the best pop punk album of all time? Is Blink-182, Enema of the State, the best pop punk album of all time? And it's a very specific question.
So I don't know if it's like definitive yes, but like I also don't know what else am I putting in that slot. Like if I'm not gonna put
Right.
that, then I would have to put Dookie, which I don't even think is representative of why you would say Enema is the greatest of all time. You know what I mean? So then I
Wait,
think
what?
so. What I'm saying is like if I don't say it's Enema and say it's Dookie, that kind of discounts everything that would have come after, because a lot of what came after is, yes, very much influenced and inspired by Dookie, but a lot more of it sounds like Enema of the State, I would say.
Right. I think the point that I was trying to make is that it was a specific question, and it was like, is it the best pop punk album? Not so much is it the most important, because I do think that those are two very different questions. And I also think that there's probably different answers for each one. I think that Blink is the better album. I think Dookie is probably the more important one, because it was the launch pad for all of it, including Blink-182. So it's kind of a stupid trick question, if you will. But you know what's funny is that when you get down to it, the two best pop punk albums of all time, 5 years apart. Explain to me why they both have to do with butts. I've thought about this so much. Why is one called Dookie and then one is called Enema? Like what are we doing here? Is it simply because that's the nature of pop punk, or is it because it's the universe cracking a joke on us? Dude, it's so weird that those are the best two albums in this genre, that they're both in the 90s and they're both booty albums. Like what are we doing?
You can't acceptably say their name in like acceptable society. I know, it's great.
Right. Yeah, it's so strange. They're so immature.
I think you answered it in your declaration.
It
has less to do with pop punk. It's the 90s. This is just that
That's a good point.
It's just the 90s are vulgar. Like the 90s are a very vulgar time. And so like everything's Bart Simpson. Everything's a fart joke. Everything is kind of like that.
That's a
in the
great
90s.
point.
So I think that pop punk was like a very much, and I've never thought about this, but pop punk is very much a 90s expression of culture in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
like,
it really is.
Feels like the 90s. Even like the pop punk in the 2000s, you just
still feels like the 90s.
It's still a very 90s feel. So I just think that's what it is. It's like the 90s were just all about like making jokes and laughing out loud at those jokes. Which Blink-182 as a band, very much that is their concept of making the jokes and everyone laughing along at the jokes. So I think that was just I don't know, we had the Butthole Surfers back in the day. We had a lot of
shout out Texas, bro. They're from here. I think I'm going to put up a poll, and I'm going to put up two separate polls. I'm going to wait a couple days in between them, and I'm going to see if anybody gives me any crap. And I'm going to put up which one is the better album, and then I'm going to put up which one is the more important album. I'm going to see if I get any kind of dialogue in there, because I do think that it's honestly, I think when you ask the question, I think my initial like snap answer is like, oh, Blink's the better album, Green Day is the more important one. But the more you're talking, there's a lot more influence coming from this Blink album than I initially kind of registered. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, influence is a little bit different time period. I think, like
Yeah,
again, the because I think of the 2000s pop punk all just sounds so much like that's why he's made the Newfound Glory point. Like I don't know that Newfound Glory sounds quite like Newfound Glory if Enema doesn't come out. You know what I mean? Like I don't know.
I mean that's a really good point.
From a perspective of the influence and also the perspective of they were on the same label, so Mark is kind of hanging out with them
Right.
as well. Yeah, it's weird though because I felt like the influence and probably similar to Green Day, it didn't really get birthed though till like people of my generation and younger actually started making music. I've noticed that.
That's a good
Because
point.
it's a lot of these bands that are like the kid bands of the when we were young. Those are the band.
Yeah.
Those are the guys like bowing down to this album and kind of talking about it in the way we are. So I think it did have, and not like it didn't have immediate impact. I think the both Dookie and Enema had the thing of like a lot of under talented bands got signed because those albums were big. So it's like we can
Yes.
replicate that, and we can do that. I think so. From that perspective, I don't know how influential that was because it was in a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of other stuff. But you look years later, all these guys, some of them who stayed with punk rock and went to other genres, they all kind of cite this album as a hugely influential album from their youth because it was just a huge album. Again, it was ever like I talked about, like I remember my aunt having a copy of the cassette. My aunt knows nothing about punk rock or
That is
anything
so weird.
like that. It was very
Well, that's I
very
mean that's
prevalent.
how there was a handful of records like that. Blink, Green Day's Dookie, Offspring Smash was like that, where people that didn't care or know anything about punk had a copy of it. I do think that those are the two at the top of the genre, and everything else I would say is pretty far behind those two records, though. And I do find it a little bit odd that after all these years of not really caring about Dookie, that the last like 6 months I've actually come to be a pretty big fan of that record. It's really weird. I'm glad they're playing it in its entirety now because I was really dreading that. I really was
Yeah.
sincerely dreading it. Now I've come around to where I'm like kind of stoked I can film it in its entirety and like revisit that at some point. But because I've had to do the review on the channel, we covered it a couple times, and then I got a cassette tape at my store, so I used that as the tester tape for my new stereo. So listen to it like front to back twice in one day, and I've just been listening to a lot of Green Day, and it's just started to grow on me after like 30 years of.
A bit of connective tissue, though. You had Jerry Finn mixed. He didn't produce Dookie. Raul Cavallo did, but he mixed Dookie, and then he produced Enema of the State. So there's a bit of a connective tissue between those two
I
albums
bet
as well.
he had something to do with the title of both albums. That bastard! Oh
He
my
probably
goodness!
It's funny. You see photos of him, and again, he's passed on. He looks like the most just like generic dude. But like all the albums he produced were nothing but fart jokes, as you were saying. So this guy must have had
That's
a hell of a sense of
hilarious.
humor.
Dude, that's so funny, bro. The fact when I realized that one was that and the other was like the same exact title, I was like, dude, that's the universe coming together and just going like it's just so random. Like, I would love to know if there was a reason behind the name of either of those besides it just being like I don't know why Green Day called their record Dookie, but I think I have an idea why Enema was called that.
Yeah, and again, talk about a relic of the time period. Like, how stupid was it? Like, thank God the album was good. How stupid was it to name your album off a take off of a movie that was like popular, but like Enemy of the State? That's what it was a takeoff of. Remember the Will Smith, Gene Hackman movie in like the late.
Wait, really?
Yeah, Enemy of the State. So then Enema of the State was just a quick play off.
Yeah, but that's like a term, not necessarily from the movie.
No, but that
right?
term was popularized in the late night. Like it. This album was, well, at least that's how I always take it, was a direct reference to that movie being so popular.
Oh man, I don't know. That's crazy. You might be right. I've never thought about that. I do know that their other working title was The Diarrhea of Anne Frank, which I personally prefer.
I love that.
And again, though, with the booty reference, dude, like these guys have some like butt fetishes and stuff. And I'm not kink shaming, dude. Do your thing, fellas. Do your thing. But The Diarrhea of Anne Frank might be the best title of all time if that had come to fruition. That's repulsive and offensive and hilarious. Like, I'm in, dude. I'm in. But yeah, you couldn't have called it that. That would have crossed a line. I think people would have been pretty upset by that one.
Well, you do that, and it just stays punk rock, right? Like it never like.
That's a good
Enema
point.
of the State was hard enough to. And again, another thing that people had to say in polite society is you had to say Enema of the State.
Yeah, that's funny, man. Dude, what a great episode this was. So next week we're doing Weezer Blue Album and US Bombs the World. Honestly, you couldn't get further apart in musical style, but
I think it's the only podcast ever that's going to be bookended by Dwayne Peters and Rivers Cuomo. Like,
Rivers
I don't know.
Cuomo.
It might be the only podcast ever.
The following week we're doing Operation Ivy because it's hitting 35 years like that same week. Actually, I think it's hitting 35 years like a week before that even. So I'll be doing live streams for Operation Ivy and Blink soon. I'm really kind of looking forward to that. That's a lot of fun for me. But yeah, dude, we got some good stuff coming. I don't have anything planned for after that, but that's two really great. We've had a lot of really, really good, strong episodes in the past couple of months. I'm very pleased with the direction that this is going.
Yeah, a lot of bands that are very like closely related to that have very like interconnected fates that we keep.
Oh, dude, our audience has been loving this, dude. Like, look at our numbers; they've been way better the last 6 months than they were the previous 6 months.
Yeah, I feel like in some ways, if you just like those 6 months you were talking about, if you break down our show, there is a bit of like these narratives of like punk history that sort of we're sort of teasing that out on this show, and where does this band fit into all the stuff that we're talking about? It's kind of the direction we've settled on.
I've gotten I've finally figured out where I'm going with this, dude. I'm really happy. I have a direction, a plan, and I'm literally at the beginning stages of execution. I'm very, very excited. I think we're gonna. I mean, dude, I literally have Dan Frampton talking to me about coming on the show. Like, that's fucking so cool, nuts, man. Dude. That's so wild, dude. Like, and I'm fully about it, bro. I talked to him a bunch of times now. He's been super freaking cool, man. Like, I owe that guy a pretty stiff apology, man. Like, I don't have to understand his channel to not be a dick. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, I was just being a turd, which is fine. You're entitled to do that. If you want to critique somebody and be a shithead about it, you're allowed to do so. I just I feel like maybe I shouldn't have. I should have just like not cared. I should have just been like, okay, I don't get it. On to the next. Although, had I not been being a shitty turd about it, he would never have said anything to me. So I guess, you know. But I was on. Yeah, dude. I was on his live stream, and then he was on one of mine. It was like really, honestly, kind of cool, man. People were like, "What the fuck? This is weird." it was fun, man. But any closing thoughts before we get out of here for the night?
No, just fun albums to celebrate.
Agreed. Very, very much agreed. I'm a little sad that you won't ever listen to the Donnas again, but when you have schools, when school's out, are we still doing 9 o'clock? Is that okay?
I was gonna tell you today it could switch, we'd have some flexibility with it switching.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let me know what you need to do, and I guess the fellas on the other show, we just stick to 8 o'clock over there, but I think they're flexible too. So yeah, whatever. We do whatever we need to do. It's all good, man. I'm pretty flexible myself. So I just like to have a plan, though. I don't like to come into things not knowing what's going on because I freak out.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome, dude. Well, thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us. If you're over here on YouTube, man, thanks for watching my ugly mug spaz out and not be able to focus unless I'm fidgeting. And if you're on Spotify, just thank you so much for listening. I'm trying to figure out a way to get the show monetized over there, and it is incredibly hard. So I don't know that it'll ever happen, to be honest. But I'm working on it, seeing if I can figure it out because, yeah, that does unfortunately matter. Rob, don't hang up quite yet. Everybody else, I'll see y'all next week. Thanks for hanging out. Have a nice day. Peace.